Now, let me introduce our lovely facilitator and presenter, Lynn Kunkel and Frankie Kropp. Lynn is a senior research project manager at Oregon Health Sciences University, okay, OHSU, yes, and has been a member of the CTN since its inception in 1999. She's a director of protocol implementation and the node coordinator for the Western States node. She coordinates all protocols within the node and serves as local training. In addition to her work with the CTN, Lynn has coordinated clinical trials throughout the state of Oregon, as well as local jails, the state of Oregon's women's prison, and Vietnam. She is a certified clinical research professional through SOCRA. And our presenter, Ms. Kropp, is the node coordinator and clinical research manager at the NIDA CTN Ohio Valley node, based at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Addiction Sciences Division. So she's also considered an old timer with quotes, joining the CTN along with the Ohio Valley node in 2000. So both of these ladies have been around for a while. And during that time, she has served as the training director and national project manager for multiple Ohio Valley node-led CTN trials, as well as serving on the CTN National Training Subcommittee, the American Indian Alaska Native Special Interest Group, and the Node Coordinators Workshop. So thank you so much, ladies, for this presentation today. And I'm going to turn things over to you, Frankie.
Hey, great. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me for this brief overview of information for the CTN nodes. Let's look at what we hope to accomplish during this webinar. So by the end of the hour, we hope that you'll be familiar with the history and infrastructure of the NIDA CTN, that you'll be familiar with the overall study development process, that you'll be familiar with benefits for engaging local nodes in the studies, and that you'll be able to name one best practice for serving as a lead node. So now let's see who's most interested in what. So Maura, can we have poll number 1, please? Okay, so which parts of today's presentation do you look forward to the most? History and infrastructure, study development process overview, engaging with local nodes for studies, or best practices for serving as a lead node?
I'll give it about 30 seconds. Would you like me to share results, Frankie?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, interesting. Best practices for serving as a lead node is our #1 spot. And we actually will talk quite a bit about that toward the end of the presentation. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So let's take a look at how the CTN began. So in 1985, the Institute of Medicine released a report that looked at the impact and treatment of substance use disorders over the previous 40 years. There were 2 main findings in this report. First, they found that serious medical, social problems have evolved or become worse due to substance use disorders. In particular, they named increases in violence, the emergence of drug-resistant tuberculosis, the emergence of need for treatment for drug-affected babies, and increases in infectious diseases such as sexually transmitted diseases and HIV. Second, and more importantly, they reported that in spite of the fact that substance use disorder is a medical illness, the focus of treatment efforts to that point had been almost entirely psychosocial. As a result of this report, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988, which authorized funds for a drug discovery and development program at NIDA. And 2 years later, the NIDA Medication Development Division was established. So NIDA had this great work being done to develop medications to address substance use disorders. That meant everything was going to be fine, right? Well, no, of course not. Despite all of the innovative work being done, A follow-up by the Institute of Medicine found that there was a significant gap between the development of effective treatments in the research setting and the adoption of those treatments by providers in the community. In other words, research really wasn't helping much because it wasn't reaching the people who had the ability to implement its discoveries. So the next year, NIDA developed the CTN to address the concerns of the Institute of Medicine by creating a means by which medical and specialty treatment providers, treatment researchers, participating patients, and NIDA cooperatively develop, validate, refine, and deliver new treatment options to patients in a real-world setting. This accomplishes two main goals. First, to determine the effectiveness of research development treatment methods across a broad range of community-based treatment settings and diverse patient populations. And second, to ensure the transfer of research results to the physicians and clinicians and providers and patients through their participation in these studies. So now that you understand a little bit about how the CTN came about, let's look at how it's structured. You may be wondering where the CTN fits into the federal structure. Governmental leadership for the CTN resides with the Center for Clinical Trials Network. Dr. Betty Tai, pictured here, has been the CCTN's director since the very beginning. In addition to Dr. Tai, Dr. Geethra Subramanian serves as the center's deputy director, and Drs. Kristen Huntley and David Liu serve as the scientific team leaders. Ron Dobbins is the program officer, and he works closely with the nodes in the planning and oversight of their research portfolios and resources. There are also a number of scientific officers who provide guidance and support to the study teams and to the various committees and work groups in the CTN. The CCTN is part of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is led by Dr. Nora Volkov. And as large as the CTN may seem, it's really just a very small part of NIDA. NIDA is one of the National Institutes of Health, and the NIH, of course, is under the Department of Health and Human Services. At the present time, there are 16 nodes in the CTN represented by the stars on this map. Blue stars represent traditional CTN nodes, while the red stars represent nodes who were specifically funded by the Federal HEAL initiative. We are, of course, coming up on a renewal period, so this map may look somewhat different after 3/1 of 25. In addition to the CCTN and the nodes, there are the Clinical Coordinating Center, or the CCC, and the Data and Statistics Center, or the DSC. These centers are based at the MS Corporation at present and are contracted by NIDA to support study teams. The CCC provides assistance in a number of ways, including assistance with project startup and ongoing study management, safety monitoring, sponsor-level quality assurance monitoring, and the management of many of the supplies necessary for our research work. The DSC provides data management, including management of the study data collection systems, ePro and eClinical. They also assist with statistical support to lead study investigators as needed for the development of the study data analysis plan and for the analysis of the study primary outcome. Both the CCC and the DSC also assist with providing reports to the Study Data and Safety Management Board or to other external groups like the FDA as needed. In addition to the larger organizational structure, the CTN has a number of internal components besides the CCTN, the nodes, and the CCC and the DSC. Each node PI is represented on the CTN Steering Committee, which is the governing body for the CTN. All other work groups and committees report to the Steering Committee. More recently, the Community Representative Council, or CIRCLE, has been developed to provide feedback from the perspective of the community providers and the consumers in the areas served by the CTN nodes and sites. The Research Development Committee, or RDC, reviews potential research concepts and makes recommendations to the CCTN as to whether those might fit well into the CTN portfolio. The Publications Committee assists authors in ensuring the highest quality of manuscripts posters, and presentations associated with CTN projects. The Node Coordinators Work Group allows for a collaboration among the node personnel who are tasked with managing the node funding. There are a number of other special interest groups which focus on the research, development, and dissemination for specialized populations, and other ad hoc work groups and task forces which convene around a specific research question or emerging issue. And of course, the study teams themselves.
Frankie, how is it determined who sits on which of these committees, or how, if somebody is interested from the nodes to serve on one of them, how are they appointed?
That's a great question, and it really depends on what the committee is. So there are a couple of these where people serve by virtue of their CTN role. So for example, the CTN steering committee is PIs only, node PIs. And if a node happens to have more than one PI, only one of those PIs is allowed to vote. So both may sit on the steering committee, but when voting comes, the node itself gets one vote. And then there's also the Node Coordinator Work Group, and that's people joining that by virtue of their CTN role. For things like the RDC, which is a subset of the steering committee, that role is self-nominated, but they have to be elected by the steering committee. For the circle, those are nominated by the node PI and then voted on and approved later. And then the publications committee is also elected by the steering committee, but there's also ad hoc volunteers for that. So for particular studies, people might volunteer to be a reviewer. And then there are voluntary appointments where you just self-nominate and you volunteer to be a part of it. That's for the special interest groups and for some of the ad hoc work groups and task forces. And then, of course, the study teams are appointed by the lead investigator for each study.
So if somebody is interested, they should speak to their node PI or node coordinator about getting involved?
Yes, indeed. I think that's always the best. No matter how interested you are in something, it's always best that those folks are aware of your interest and they can help navigate for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we've talked a lot about nodes, but what is a node? So if you look in the corner, you'll see the CTN snowflake, that little red and blue icon. So let's go back to that snowflake concept. So each node is comprised of the grantee institution and its associated performance sites. The grantee institution is where the node principal investigator resides. And like I said, sometimes there are more than one node principal investigators, and they may be at the same grantee institution, or there may be two collaborating grantee institutions that serve together as one node. The sites are a combination of types of treatment sites, which might include community substance use disorder treatment programs, emergency departments, primary care, or even specialty clinics like for prenatal care or for HIV care. Nodes may have long-standing relationships with some of their sites, who become their go-to sites for various types of studies. And these sites may engage in other CTN activities such as advisory boards or special interest groups or committees. Other sites, which I've represented here by the dotted lines, may be engaged only for one particular study for which they are uniquely qualified. And then afterwards, they may decide to back away until such time that they're again needed for their unique setting. And it's important to note that the number and type of associated sites does not remain static. Nodes may develop relationships with new sites as time goes on. Now, although each node organizes itself differently, there's typically a number of personnel needed to successfully operate a CTN node. In addition to the principal investigators and their co-investigators and sub-investigators, each node is required to have at least one person who serves as a node coordinator. The node coordinator's role is to ensure that funds received by NIDA are managed properly and that annual reports and funding requests are submitted as needed. The node coordinator may also serve as a liaison between the associated performance sites in the node for any non-study related needs. If the node is engaged in study activity, then a number of other personnel may be needed to cover a variety of study-related functions, such as QA, protocol management, regulatory, statistical, and training. If the node has a site participating in a study led by another node, some of these roles may not be necessary, or they might have a limited scope of responsibility specifically to support that site alone. When a node is leading a study, however, these roles may broaden to encompass responsibility for all participating sites, or to serve as leadership for the local personnel at the participating nodes. So let's talk about funding. Nodes are funded through a cooperative agreement, which is a grant, but functions differently than grants you may be more used to, like an R01 or an R34. In the CTN cooperative agreement, there's funding to help maintain a minimum level of support for node core functions, and we'll call that the prime award. And then there's funding that is specific to one or more studies or other research activities. The prime award usually covers some funding for the core node personnel as well, and some other non-personnel costs such as travel, communications, and subawards to core personnel who reside at other institutions. Each year, the node must submit an annual report to NIDA, which includes the budget for next year's prime award. When a study comes along, funding for that comes separately from the prime award. Study funding may come via supplement requests, carryover requests, and/or subawards with the lead node. Sometimes each node with a participating study site submits one of these funding requests and then issues a subaward to their site for study performance. In other instances, all the funding is awarded to the lead node, who then issues subawards to both the participating sites and to their local nodes. Both the prime award and the study funding are issued annually. Unlike other grant mechanisms, which might allow you to automatically use any remaining funds by rolling them over from one year to the next, the CTN cooperative agreement does not do that. Instead, nodes may submit a formal request called a carryover request to use those leftover funds from prior performance years, and that's usually to support a specific study. If permission to do so is granted, the node will then receive a formal notice of award, allowing them to use those funds for the requested purpose. So we are the clinical trials network, right? So let's take a quick look at the process for developing a study in the CTN. The network structure of the CTN allows for rich collaborations that enhance the level of expertise and wisdom for both the design and the implementation of new studies. In general, the NIDA CTN expectation is that the nodes will collaborate with each other in both the development and the conduct of studies funded by the NIDA CTN. Studies are developed through the submission and review of a concept. Investigators collaborate to develop the idea for a study and prepare a 3-page concept, along with a title page, reference page, and budget, and send that to the Research Development Committee. The RDC then assigns the concept to reviewers who provide their feedback to both the investigators and to the CCTN. The CCTN reviews the concept and the RDC's feedback, and then they determine whether or not the concept should move forward to study development. Lynn, did you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, who can submit a concept?
Great question. So according to the CTN policies and procedures, investigators interested in conducting research in the CTN may submit a concept, but they must be affiliated with a node, and they have to have node PI support. So an individual from outside the current nodes could potentially think about submitting a concept, but what they would have to do is approach a node PI, develop a collaborative relationship, And then if that node PI agrees to sponsor the concept, that individual may submit it as part of that new node. Or not new node, but as part of that node.
Thank you.
Make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, great, thanks. As I noted earlier, the concept is limited to 3 pages, but that does not include the title page, the budget, the references, or the statement of the inclusion of minority populations. Specific instructions on completing the concept submission are available on the CTN TPR website within the CTN toolbox, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. When the RDC reviewer receives the concept, they will indicate both the strengths and the weaknesses of the concept in the areas indicated here, and then they will provide a score for the concept. So you may already be familiar with the CTN TPR website from reviewing documents and trainings and trial progress reports for each of the studies. What you may not be familiar with, however, is the later tabs that include the CTN toolbox. The CTN toolbox provides a wealth of information to investigators and study teams, including instructions for developing the concept submission. Other items in the toolbox provide templates and guidance documents for protocol development, protocol pre-implementation, study implementation, and closeout. Okay, so now we're going to talk about lead teams, and it sounded like most of you were interested in hearing information about that. So let's take another poll. So Maura, can you put up poll number 2? Okay, so the question here is, will you be serving on a lead team for a new study within the next year? Yes, no, or maybe you're waiting for NIDA to give you the green light and the thumbs up to move forward.
I'll give it about 10 more seconds and then I'll share the results.
All right, great. Okay, so looks like about 18% of you are looking forward to being on a lead node or a lead team this year. And about 18% of you are waiting for the thumbs up from NIDA. And then the rest of you are not currently looking toward that, but maybe just interested in what it means to be part of a lead team. Okay, thank you, Maura. So each concept approved for development will assemble a lead team. Some of the team, including the principal investigators, who are now called the lead investigators, and some of the sub or co-investigators will have already been named as part of the concept submission. But once approved to move forward, NIDA CCTN will appoint someone from their scientific teams to the project who will guide the entire study along from start to finish. The NIDA contracted CCC and DSC will also appoint staff to the study, and the lead investigator will identify their logistics personnel to develop and manage the various components of study implementation. And finally, the node coordinator will support the rest of the lead team, particularly in the area of budgets and subawards. Once the concept is approved, the study's primary investigator or lead investigator will submit for funding and begin the protocol development process. The process for putting together a CTN study is a webinar all by itself, so we're just going to hit the highlights here. The initial protocol is submitted to the NIDA Protocol Review Board for review and feedback. Once approved, the study lead team begins work on developing all the logistics for the study, including all the guidance documents, regulatory activities, study database and case report forms, and the procurement of medications, devices, and biological measure supplies. Concurrently, the lead team will go through the process of selecting sites for the study. Once selected, the funding process will be completed for participating sites, and if budget allows, for their local nodes as well. Sites will prepare locally for participating in the study, and study staff will be appropriately trained by the lead team. As a reminder, the CTN TPR website contains many resources in its CTN toolbox and library to assist the lead teams in putting together everything that's needed for this process. As sites complete the pre-launch activities, they will be endorsed to begin the study activities with participants. One thing to consider as you begin to put together a study is how the funding structure will work for your particular study. Funding for CTN studies is provided via current CTN grants by one of two funding approaches. The most common approach has funding being provided to the various nodes involved in each study, with the study sites receiving funds by a subaward from their partnering or local node. The second involves NIDA funding a study's lead node, who then receives all of the funding and provides it to the study's partnering nodes and study sites via subcontracts. This model provides the lead node with some additional flexibility needed to adjust funding based on start dates and progress. Some teams using this module have opted for enhanced lead node oversight and limited local node involvement and funding. This is expected to be discussed with potential sites during the site selection process. Local nodes anticipating the need for more involvement with the study site may want to consider leveraging their core award.
Frankie, how is it determined which route the funding is provided for the specific study?
Good question. Yeah, so in general, NIDA is the one who makes that determination. In a case where a lead node either does not anticipate funding local nodes or isn't interested in engaging local nodes, that should be made clear in the proposed study budget that's sent along with the concept. And it should be discussed thoroughly with the NIDA program officer, Ron Dobbins, before making any final decisions about how the question of local nodes will be handled.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The CTN policies and procedures state that decisions about site participation in protocols involve communication and collaboration among the lead team, the node PIs, and the sites considering participation according to the site selection plan. Each lead investigator and their lead team will develop a site selection plan, and that will include materials to guide the sites through the selection process. These materials might include surveys or questionnaires, which ask for important information about the site and about its potential suitability for the study. The lead investigator or their designee will then communicate with each node and provide them with materials to distribute to their potential sites. Teams at the local nodes may distribute the materials to all of their associated sites, or they may target sites that they know would be most suited to the study based on their area of specialty or their population base. Site teams then complete the materials and return them to their local nodes for submission to the lead investigator. Once all materials have been received, the lead investigator and the rest of the lead team proceed with additional selection activities until they determine that the sites that will be included in the study.
Frankie, can I emphasize that for just 1 second?
Sure.
The importance of, you mentioned earlier, it's always best to go to your node PI or node coordinator if you're interested in committees and so forth. But I think that we'd really like to point out that it's important if a site is interested in participating in a trial, that they do send the site application through the local node.
Yes.
So that communication is clear about what has been submitted as far as sites, and so local nodes can discuss whether or not it's an appropriate mechanism or appropriate protocol for the sites to be involved in and so forth. So I think that making sure that sites understand that channel of the communication is really important to highlight.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. That's a great point. So as you move into the site selection process as a lead team, it's critical to define how the lead node will coordinate efforts with the local node personnel. And as Lynn said, there are many benefits to planning on heavy involvement from the local nodes, which we'll discuss in a minute. However, whether lead teams want significant local node involvement or prefer to manage most efforts at the lead node level, it's important to define and document local node expectations at the time of site selection and to ensure that the local node teams are aware of those expectations. Historically, CTN policies and procedures have required the involvement of local nodes, and it's still expected that nodes will work together in the development and implementation of a study. But why should we deal with a local node at all? After all, most other funding mechanisms don't have such a thing as a local node. This is one of the ways in which the CTN structure is totally different, and is one of the main reasons why the CTN has been so successful all these years. The role of the node PI includes general oversight and study management, regulatory requirements, ensuring everyone at the site is properly trained, monitoring study progress, and ensuring that the site has what it needs to successfully conduct the study. When a study does not involve a node PI, the lead investigator has to assume these responsibilities, in addition to everything else that they have to do for leading the study nationally. Most studies, however, provide guidance for what they expect of the local node PIs and their teams to ensure that these responsibilities are met. As a lead project manager for many studies, I've learned that studies run much more smoothly when local nodes provide support from a QA monitor and a project manager, who could be the same person, as well as support from the local node regulatory staff to help with IRB processes, and the local node coordinator for assisting their sites with the budgeting process. And then the node PI, of course, is responsible to ensure that the required oversight and management occurs, although their work is often more behind the scenes. Lynn, did you have any more thoughts on this?
Yeah, the other real important reason to keep the local team involved, and we'll talk about this even more so in a couple of minutes, but as Frankie mentioned earlier, each node is responsible for an annual progress report for how projects are being implemented and how it's going. And if we're not informed about how projects are going and that communication isn't open, we can't provide those updates in our annual progress report. And so it's really important that we understand what's going on within our node and have that communication with the sites to know exactly what's happening, be able to problem solve, be able to accurately represent it in the RPPR, be able to put it in the annual progress report about how many people we've enrolled and the demographics associated. So there are other more formal dissemination kind of activities which supports why it's important to keep those the local node involved.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well said. Thanks. So what are the benefits? So I've been both a lead project manager and a local node project manager. And my experience is that there's many benefits to having the local node heavily engaged in a study. First and foremost, the local node has a much better understanding of their local site than the lead node does, particularly when navigating differences in things like state and local regulations, institutional requirements, staffing challenges, and other local issues. Local nodes have the ability to be more frequently available to the site on an as-needed basis, and they can quickly go on site to address an emergent concern. Even in geographically diverse nodes like ours here in Ohio Valley, if there's a problem, our site is probably closer to us than it is to the lead node, and we can then hop in the car and be on site in a day or two at the most. Recently, one of our sites ran into some staffing issues that caused them to fall significantly behind in entering source data into eClinical. Although the lead team was aware of the problem, there was little that they could do to assist other than keep reminding the site to get their data entry in as quickly as possible. However, our local node QA monitor, who was trained and approved for data entry, was able to then hop in the car and go spend 3 days at the site doing data entry so that they were caught up. Local QA monitors can also visit sites earlier and more frequently than the CCC monitors can, which allows them to identify problem trends early on and provide retraining or other correction to get the team back on the right track. As a lead project manager, I can attest that the local node monitoring reports are very helpful to me in understanding the challenges being faced by the site. And with that more timely information, I can then work with the local node and site as needed to problem solve. Local node to lead node communications are also beneficial to help the lead node understand the backstory for identified challenges, or for those times when there needs to be a discussion about a challenge that the teams don't necessarily want to bring up in front of everybody else on the national call. Lynn, I remember several years ago when an OBN site was a site in a study that you were the lead project manager for. Although they were going above and beyond expectations for recruitment efforts, the patient population just was not there. And the team didn't want to say it publicly, but they were feeling pretty beat up on the national calls because they felt that their failure to recruit was being pointed out without any acknowledgement of their efforts. Some of the team, in fact, were so discouraged that they were considering quitting. And it was so good to have that local node to lead node relationship so that I could reach out to you and that we could talk about what the team was experiencing, but was afraid to say directly. And because of that, your group, if you remember, you changed how you talked about study recruitment, and our team felt appreciated, even though they continued to struggle with recruitment. And because of that, that helped the site end the study with a positive view of the CTN, which in turn has led to CTN 80 being able to work with an investigator from that site, as well as that site being open to submitting other site selection surveys as relevant ones came up. So thank you for that. Although we could do a whole webinar just on serving as a lead node, I do want to leave you with a few things I've found to be best practices. Let's begin with a few practices the OVN team has found to be helpful when putting together the protocol and study implementation processes. First, as I mentioned earlier, the CTN TPR website maintains the CTN toolbox, which has lots of guidance and templates to assist you in the initial development of your protocol and planning. But another practice we find very beneficial is to begin work on the study operations manual and the study training once there's a good draft of the protocol. Often, as you walk through the explanations and logistics of how this study protocol is going to be carried out, you find things in the protocol that maybe need further clarification, or even you may run across some study assessments that are needed, but were missed when doing the initial protocol development. And so then these can be corrected before the protocol is approved by NIDA and then sent off to the study's institutional review board, and that reduces the need for protocol amendments. Also, while you're developing your study, lean heavily on the experience and the work of others. It's important to reach out to CTN investigators who have done similar work and consider asking them to join your protocol development team, or even join as a collaborator or a co-investigator. As you develop study documents, look at what others have done and use those as templates. There is sure no reason to reinvent the wheel, and the CTN TPR website has lots of examples under their library tab. You'll likely be working closely with the Clinical Coordinating Center and the Data and Statistics Center as you put things together. But as the lead node, you are the ones responsible for ensuring that the protocol and associated materials and processes meet the goals of the study. And as I noted earlier, determine how your team will integrate their local nodes. It's best to make these plans before the site selection process, so that nodes and sites can take that under consideration when determining whether or not to apply as a site.
I'd also like to mention, what I have found, Frankie, you referenced earlier how you and I talked about when there was problems going on at one of the sites or communication wasn't as clear as they had hoped. And getting involved with either like a node coordinator or a national project manager, talking with somebody that has already had this experience is invaluable. Just talking with them up front about what went well, what would you do over again, how would you suggest in this study we frame things? What would be good resources? Who would be good to talk to about these things? Finding that information out, because as Frankie said, there's a wealth of information across the CTN at all different levels. And so, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Get experience from other people, talk with them one-on-one about the successes and the challenges that they've had. That has really helped me in all aspects, whether it's writing the RPPR or developing a study or a site selection, or even if you're thinking about a couple of different sites and you want a little bit more background information about them, talking with people that have worked with them before about the success of the protocol or the communication patterns of the team and so forth. All of those things are available to us in our collaborative agreement.
Yeah, that's great points. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Okay, let's look at some other best practices for study implementation. Lead nodes wear so many hats during a successful study implementation. In addition to being the resident experts in the study, lead nodes need to channel the communications. They need to supply sites with all the tools they need to perform the study. They need to monitor progress and collaboratively problem solve to address emergent issues. And they have to serve as cheerleaders for the study sites. Involving local nodes makes this process so much easier. So it's important to engage them early on in the pre-implementation process to assist the site in obtaining the resources they need and preparing for launch. In the studies we've led here at the Ohio Valley Node, we found it helpful to provide a list of all equipment and supplies that will be needed for the study, designating whose responsibility for purchasing it, and for some specialty items, exactly what brand and model number we want them to get and where they can buy it. We also list specific SOPs that we will require of the site. And as part of study training, we encourage sites and their nodes to rehearse all the study procedures using mock participants. Communication is key in a successful study. So maintaining lists of all study personnel with email, phone, and address helps ensure you always know how to reach the teams and that they always know how to reach you. You'll want to develop regular opportunities for communications. Weekly national calls with everyone help provide for ongoing general updates, but additional calls with just the lead team help with planning and problem solving, and setting aside time for conversations with each individual site and its node allows teams to discuss situations that they would prefer not to share publicly. CTN studies tend to be fairly complex, and there's a lot we're already asking the sites to learn during startup. So the more structure we can offer them to assist them with performing the study, the better. For example, lead nodes may want to provide standard sets of logs for various management tasks like inventory logs or reimbursement logs. I find it's helpful to provide the sites with a variety of recruitment and retention tools that have already been approved by the SIRB as templates. And that way, sites can simply enter their local information as indicated on the template, and then be able to use the materials right away without having to go through seeking additional IRB approval. And it's important that lead node communication goes both ways. In addition to directing communications out to the sites and to the CCC and the DSC, lead nodes need to take full advantage of incoming information, such as the reports available to them, which would include the trial progress reports from the DSC and the local node monitoring reports. Lead nodes should also seek opportunities to solicit feedback from sites and their local nodes to identify any areas of confusion or study procedures that may need some adjustments. Finally, it's important to help everyone work on the study see themselves as a cohesive team from the very beginning. One simple way to do this is to develop a study brand, such as a logo or a certain look to the study materials. Team building opportunities help with this as well. I want to give a shout out to the CTN 101 team, who diligently starts every national call with a short trivia contest. It's lots of fun. And people on the call often share personal stories as part of the process, and that has assisted with team bonding. Doing a CTN study is hard. Progress may be slow, and site staff may become frustrated or disappointed. And it's important as a lead node to recognize this and build in some activities to help boost staff morale and cheer them on to success. Treats are always welcome by the sites, but even little moments of recognition for good efforts will do the job as well. We've talked a little bit about the CTN website, where the CTN toolbox and other resources are located. And that CTN website requires a login and a password that can be requested by using the link here. Another great source of general information is the NIDA CTN page, which has information about the nodes, CTN structure, and the CTN studies. In addition, the CTN dissemination library is a great resource for finding training resources, CTN-related journal articles, presentations, manuals, and reports, as well as the latest CTN directory. And any CTN member who would like to subscribe can receive the CTN Bulletin, a regular publication sent via email that has the latest updates on news from the CTN. Finally, for those investigators interested in utilizing the data created through the CTN over the years, this NIDA Data Share site is an open access website that houses data from CTN completed studies. So thank you so much for joining me for this brief introduction to the CTN. I hope it's been really helpful to you. And I think we do have just a few moments if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Frankie. I think you made a lot of really great points. And Lynn, you too. You jumped in there with like questions I would have had myself. We did not get any questions in the chat during the presentation, but I'll allow just a few minutes here for anyone who has a specific question they would like to raise now.
I'll ask one question just to kind of kick it off. And this actually came up in a call that I had yesterday with a team that is not quite as familiar as the inner works of the CTN. And they had submitted a concept, and there was a discussion about how you decide who the lead node is and whether there has to be a lead node or not. This is kind of off the cuff. What I directed them to think about is that many of the concepts and protocols within the CTN are across various nodes. The lead investigator or the co-lead investigators might be from two different nodes. The lead team itself might be comprised of varied people from various nodes and so forth. But ultimately, there needs to be one PI that is kind of responsible. I'll use the example of 125, which is a secondary data analysis. And the Western States node is listed as one of the nodes that are involved in it. So what do we do in that situation? Well, and then Ohio Valley node is also one of the nodes associated with it. So we both kind of report on that in our RPPR, and we both say that we're co-lead nodes. We talk about, our involvement in the protocol, how the protocol is going, what the future brings for the protocol, and so forth. And that speaks to two things, one of which is collaboration across all of our nodes, but we all need to be informed about what's happening, so we're delivering the same message. Right. So one person ultimately, and it's Kathy Berlew for that project specifically, she's the one who says, well, ultimately, it's collaborative. Everybody's at the same table. Everybody has the same voice, but there needs to be one person that kind of has a little bit foot forward. I'm kind of curious about if other people have had other experiences with that and how they've kind of handled that situation about deciding who is going to be the lead node, and if there's any discussion or benefits to really having one person, one node be the lead team, or whether it's more of a collaborative thing like 125. Frankie, what are your thoughts about that? Because I know you're the other side of that protocol.
Yeah, so I think it depends on how well the teams work together, and how well they engage the rest of the nodes in making that decision. So, for example, we are co-leading with the University of Utah, which is the Greater Intermountain Node for CTN 138. And one of the things that has worked real successfully is that both of the node teams have worked very, very closely to determine how this is going to work. And so there are some duties that have been placed specifically in Utah, and there are some duties that have been placed specifically in the Ohio Valley node. And there are other duties that are shared pretty equally. And that has worked out really well so far. I see Andrew, who's the 138 protocol manager for that study. Andrew, do you have any thoughts about how things have worked for 138 so far?
Yes, thanks for asking that. It's a lot of collaboration, and it's leaning on expertise from both nodes. There's plenty to learn from other people. I mean, I've been around for a long time, but I'm always learning more and love the collaboration because people will see things that I don't necessarily see. And just delineating duties and figuring out who's going to best support the success of the study itself.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Andrew.
That's interesting because when you were talking about the nodes, Frankie, you know, there's 16 nodes and, you know, you showed the map and stuff. Some nodes have, they are the MPI mechanism, which means that they have multiple PIs. Our Western States node is that situation. And so it's Oregon Health Sciences University with Stanford University. And it seems very similar to what you described, Frankie, as far as, you know, we've got this node. We are the grantees, meaning the money comes to OHSU and then we subcontract down. But Keith Humphreys, our MPI at Stanford, and Todd work very collaboratively. But when we develop that relationship, we kind of say, okay, what are your guys' strengths? What is your expertise in? Okay, Stanford will take care of dissemination activities and webinars and doing all those activities. OHSU has 20 years in the CTN. We're really experienced with implementing trials and finding sites, so we'll take care of that portion of it. So really kind of what both of you and Andrew said, talking about what strengths, what is a natural fit, how can we work together, how can we fill that, you know, all the pieces needed with all the very different people, but having information backing each other up, but yet having main responsibilities for things. So thank you.
Yeah, great question. Great discussion.
Any other questions you'd like to ask? Well, I'd like to say thank you, Frankie. This was, you know, whenever new people come on board, we always try to give them this kind of background. And it's great now to have the resources of this webinar, the videotaped and audio tape of the webinar, as well as the slides. You did a wonderful job of being able to fit a lot of information into 45 minutes. And we appreciate your vast experience in all of this and leadership with all of the protocols that you've led.
Oh, well, thank you. And back at you, Lynn. We've leaned on each other's shoulders for many, many, many years. And I very much appreciate you being a part of this webinar.
And I think that's actually one of the keys to walk away from this webinar, knowing that there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of experience in the CTN. The CTN is unique, and there's always a friend that will help guide you and tell you the good sides and the bad sides and the things to, you know, if I had another time to do this over again, I would change things like this, or this has been very successful. So there's resources available out there to help people. There's people that are willing to talk to you about how to be successful in the CTN. And I have been very thankful for all the collaborations at all the different levels.
Yeah, me too.
Me three. Thank you so much, ladies. This is such a great webinar. Hopefully this will just be the first of many others to help support local nodes and node coordinators. Thank you very much for your presentation today. And I wrote this in the chat, but just in case you hadn't seen it or you joined late, all of this has been recorded and the accompanying handout and the recording will be posted to the CTN Dissemination Library within 2 weeks. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.